Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessments. In these sessions, we will look at how to evaluate ecological impacts when we do EIA. And in this particular session, in this segment, first we will get familiar with some definitions and concepts related with ecological impacts. And accordingly, our coverage will include that we'll look at the key factors of ecosystems, then we'll look at ecosystem resilience, what does it mean and what are various aspects of resilience. Then we'll look at the terminology habitat and what our concern should be, and then we'll look at species population, what does it mean and how do we take care of it. So accordingly, our learning outcomes will that after completion of this particular session, you should be able to identify key factors of ecosystems, and then you should be able to define ecosystem resilience, habitat, and species population. So we have already seen legislation related with ecology in India, and we had also seen some examples from across the world. So that part you might reflect on it and what all we have provision in India, but today we'll focus on the definitions and concepts and then move on to the methods part. So evaluating ecological impact is said to be very challenging because one thing that it's very complex interaction. So there is interaction at the spatial levels and then also at various temporal scales. So it happens in different geographies and then it also happens at different time period. So that's why it's very complex and therefore it also needs very, you have to be very careful what kind of change would happen because of the planned or the proposed development. So in the figure, you can see how the interaction is happening. You can look at the green arrows. You can look at the green arrows which represent growth process and blue arrow represent mortality process. And thick dotted line and arrows represent complex system interaction which is happening here. So you see how this is just very one example of looking at how the interaction is happening. So the other reason for it being very complex is even the ecological baseline is very dynamic. And it's dynamic in the space as well as in the time. So it's constantly changing. And so whenever you do prepare the baseline, then it might be difficult to determine what kind of changes are happening naturally or they are happening because of the proposed project. So that's another level of challenge we see in this area. Further, we see that there's also impacts, continuous impacts of the environmental change, global environmental change. So because of the climate change, the situation is also constantly changing and it's changing very rapidly. Therefore, it is becoming further difficult to establish the baseline condition as the changes are very rapid. So now looking at the definitions and concepts, we see ecology, and ecology is the study of ecosystems, it is the study of habitats, it's the study of communities and species, and it is very important to understand what these are and how they are interrelated. So how these species are interrelated, how the habitat works, how the ecosystem works. And an ecosystem is said to be very self-sustaining, and it's a functional system where with the interaction and all the relationship, it exists on its own, and it has all the dimension, physical, chemical and biological qualities in an ecosystem. So that is what is ecology study about. Then looking at habitat, what is habitat? Habitat is a condition which is required to support a species or a community of species in a particular location. So wherever that conditions are required, that conditions are defined as the habitat. Then we also see community of species in a habitat. So, which is like when we say community, we mean grouping of different species that have evolved in a way that allows that they live together, coexist, and they are generally seen together. You will be able to find them together all the time. So that is what is said as community of species in a habitat. And then you have biotype, which is again very typical environment which supports specific, and even that you can recognize the community like a biotype. It is identifiable, and you will see that all these terms are interchangeable. They are more or less representing the same thing, and then you will also find that one term is used for the other. When we undertake assessments related with ecology, then we identify, we evaluate, we take stock of things, and we also assess the impact of the kind of development which is going to happen, and we're going to see it like what kind of impact will happen on the biodiversity, what kind of impact will happen on the ecosystem, and what kind of impact will happen on ecosystem services. So you are familiar with all these terms now: biodiversity, ecosystems and ecosystem services. So we really test like what will happen on these. So all the EIA procedure of identification, quantification and evaluating of potential impact is taken care of, and it is taken particularly in case of biodiversity, ecosystem services. So it is important that in the scoping stage, while you undertake ecological impact assessments, you also identify the receptors or the features. So when we say receptor, we mean the elements which will be receiving all these kind of changes. So the receptor or the feature that are likely to be sensitive, which can be impacted by it, with the range of activities which will happen because of this proposed project. So it's very important to take care of that. And if you see what are the different kind of ecological receptors, then you see you have ecosystems, and then you have species population, then you have individual species which can be receptors, any specific which are endangered. It can be an ecological feature, and then it can also be an unique landscape. Further, we see that it can also be the area of habitat which is essential for the project itself. So these all can be the ecological receptor, and you need to identify them at the stage of scoping itself. So when you are in the scoping stage, you should also confirm what development you are doing, whether it is compatible with maintaining the biodiversity or not. So you need to take care of that. So whatever you are planning, whether that project is, what kind of activities will take place because of that project, they are compatible in maintaining the biodiversity or not. So that was about the certain aspect which you take care of. Now we'll look at the key factors of ecosystems. So one of the very important aspects of ecosystem is that there are many interactions which takes place between components, and then the interaction not only takes between components but also between the processes, and these interactions are many times very delicate. So where there any kind of change can influence the way they interact, and then the total outcome might change. So, for example, you see change in the vegetation cover can change the soil, and then the soil can further change the bacteria and fungi and so on. Change in one component can cause effect which can be difficult to identify or predict, and there can be impact on food chain, there can be impact on energy flow, impact on cooling effects, temperature of a place. So, a lot of things can vary, and change in climate can affect other factors also, like it can also change the geomorphology, hydrology and soil condition at that can happen at a global or an ecosystem scale. In this image you can see a simple model of interactions between subsystems of terrestrial ecosystem. You can see how the environmental systems affects the community, then how community like the plant, animal, microbes affect the environmental system. Then you can see interaction between environmental systems. In the center you can see how interaction is happening within the community. So you can even witness change in climate because of the change in geomorphology, hydrology and soil condition it can happen at any scale. So now trying to understand that was the typical aspects of ecosystem, that it's their constant interaction, and how one change can impact the other change. So now looking at the ecosystem resilience, what does this means? So ecosystem resilience means the stability, how stable is your environment, how fragile or sensitive it is to the changes, how resilient it is, or when we say resilience, so what's the capacity to recover and recreate itself, whatever destruction has been done. So all these attributes are very, very important of ecosystem from the impact assessment point of view, particularly when you are doing ecological impact assessment. So from that point of view, these aspects are very important. So let's try to understand these terminologies. So when we say stability, what do we mean by stability? So by stability, we want to say that it's the state in which changes happen over time, and these changes are within normal bounds of variation. So those changes are happening, but it is in the normal boundary, normal range, so that it doesn't affect the stability of the environment, and it has the ability to resist any kind of environmental change. So any drastic change would not happen, it would cope up within those variations. Within this, we also see there is a term called negative feedback. So this is the negative feedback, which exists within the ecosystem, that slows down a process. So environment by in itself, or the system by in itself, will slow down any process so that it doesn't drastically change or crosses its limit from where it cannot regain it. Another term is about the inertia, which is like delay, time lag, or slowness in the response. So how the ecosystem would respond, it will have some slowness in that, and so that it allows recovery whenever the things are removed, whatever external impact is happening, when they are removed, it allows the ecosystem to recover, ecology to recover. Looking at the term fragility, sensitivity, so it is the ecosystem's weakness or susceptibility to the environmental pressure. So how weak any particular system is. So that is what we mean by fragility or sensitivity. And a fragile ecosystem is more easily, it can, if a system is fragile, then it is said to be very easily affected, or it will quickly change because of any kind of pressure, and it will lose its ability to recover. So it might be not same anymore, or it will not be able to get back to normal if it's very fragile. So that also affects the stability of the ecosystem. So more the fragile the system is, it's less stable. So now looking at the resilience part of it. So it's the ability of an ecosystem to absorb disturbances. So how capable the system is to absorb any kind of disturbance. Whatever happens, it gets back to normal without crossing its threshold to a different where it changes its form. So this can also be said as the resilience can be also said as the stability. Likewise, we see the term recoverability, which is like ecosystem's ability to return to its pre-disturbance state. So how well it can get back to that, and the speed at which it can do so. So how fast it can recover if the disturbance is removed. So this recoverability is an important aspect for EIA, and especially for the short-term impact, because when you're doing construction or certain things, and if the ecosystem has the ability to recover whatever temporary changes, whatever activities are going on when it is removed, then if it is able to recover for that matter, temporary air pollution, because of the construction. So when the construction work gets over, then it's able to recover itself in due course of time. So these are very important aspects when you're taking care of EIA. Then another term you look at is recreatability. So that's the potential for reestablishing an ecosystem of richness and complexity similar to the ecosystem that has been destroyed. So how much it will be able to become what it was in the original shape. So it's the capacity of that ecosystem to come back to its original form. So that's recreatability, how much it's able to recreate it. So we see that understanding of such properties help to determine which mitigation approach will be suitable for a place and for an impact. So once you know these things, the pattern of that system, you will be able to come up with mitigation, appropriate mitigation solutions. So if you find that ecosystem is resilient and whatever changes are happening, it will be able to recover. So then in that case, you don't need to have a mitigation. Mitigation is not really required. And if it is the other way around, that the ecosystem doesn't have the ability to recover, it's very fragile and does not have the required resilience which is needed, then you need to have mitigation measures, or you might not be able to take those projects in place. And it's also said that technically it's nearly not possible to come back to the original state. So as a professional, it's important for you to learn to differentiate these contexts and processes. So what is going to happen, what is going to recover, what is not going to recover, what mitigation has to be taken place, what is what procedure. So it's very important for you to understand these. So similarly, you need to understand time lag for recovery. So how much time also it will take. So that also you need to understand for developing appropriate mitigation measures. And this might be different for different. So now looking at the term habitat, here we'll look at there are number of aspects of the habitat which determine the performance of the environment, like how it can really absorb different impacts which it is going to encounter because of the proposed development. So those aspects which will allow it to absorb. So if you look at it, it's the species composition. So what is species composition? Species composition refers to the numbers and types of species in that particular context or the landscape. So you look at the species composition, what all species are there. So it is advisable to undertake quantitative data. So it is suggested that you should take quantitative data on species abundance, what all species are there, how much they are there, And apart from quantitative, you should also describe the major species or the keystone species. We have learnt about this term before. And then there's also indicator species, like the species which really tell you like what's really going on in this, whether the environment is normal or it's polluted. And such studies are important in the detailed survey. So here you see how in this particular example they have taken taken this from the Low Country Corridor project, and then you see how they have taken 3.0 biotic resources, habitat types. They have given all those descriptions here in the center, you can see, and then in the right hand side you can see how they have quantified how much area is within each kind of wetland. So in this also you need to take care of the vegetation structure, the physiognomy. So what do we mean by vegetation structure? So in this particular, when we look at vegetation structure, we look at the physical structure and what kind of features of vegetation are there, and that has influence of what kind of wildlife population would be there in that particular form or the composition of vegetation. And also we see the vertical structure that and how it is stratified of stratification of the vegetation type. So in the image you can see different structure and wildlife which it could hold would vary accordingly. So you can see tall trees, and then you can see the moderate height and the shrubs, and then according to that the wildlife changes what it would hold there. So within this you also look at a species richness, like how diverse is it. So not just the quantity of it, but then how many varieties are there. And you also measure the trophic structure. You also look at the flow of energy and nutrients through communities and ecosystems, so how each one is important there and what kind of role it is taking. And then you also identify the food chain to understand these energy route. And it's very important to have these understanding because it helps you to develop the mitigation strategies. So in the image you can see energy and nutrient flow through the terrestrial ecosystem. In the left side you can see the input of light energy to the tropical level 1, mainly the green plants. Then you can see how the transfer is happening to the tropical level 2, like herbivorous, and then also tropical level 5, the decomposers, like which are microbes and soil invertebrates. And you see how the transfer is going on, taking place from T3 level, carnivorous, followed by T4 and T5. So you see how they are interdependent and how one system is supporting the other one. So these understanding is important, but these understanding can take years of study. And then in this also you will notice that there are spatial patterns, and you can see that also there is configuration of communities, like where you would find what kind of plant, what kind of animals, what kind of microbes, and these spatial patterns usually change gradually. So you would see that when you move across the places, you will keep on seeing those variations. And you would also find transition zone, another term, ecotones, so where there is sudden transition in a geographical area of one species type to the other, and you would see those differences. And then you also see that there are temporal patterns, so there can be variation with time also in the same spatial geographical area, there can be variation. So you see community changes through time. These plants, animals, microbes would change with time. And like you would see some changes are short-term changes, include seasonal variation, and it will change with the vegetation cycle, like how there is canopy, there is and then there is springtime, then there is fall time, and then so the vegetation type wood coverage would also change. And then so these are like easily identifiable. And then so these short term changes are not very much of concern, but then there can be environmental alarms like fire, storm, flood, droughts and cold. So these can would also have an abrupt pattern. Another term you would see is ecological succession, so which means progressive, like a stage wise process, and that would together culminate together when all those steps take together would come and become stable, and they will develop to a climax community. That means a very stable community, and you also call it as biomes. So it would reach as a steady state. So the ecological succession, which means a progressive step, eventual slow steps, and then they come together, those changes one after the happen, like there might be new species coming, old species, and they would no longer fight but start cohabiting the place, and then they would reach a very stable situation. So, however, it is seen that it is very difficult to predict succession accurately, because how the biomes are identified and have wide range within itself. So, if we have already seen biomes, so we see that it already has a lot of diversity. So, it's very, very difficult to really predict the succession, what kind of changes are happening, what kind of stages they are crossing. Now, coming to our another topic which we are looking at, species population. So species population means the composition like how the species are, like what's the quantity and how are they distributed. So species composition, it where you describe the numbers of how many species are there in each species, how many numbers are there, and types of species, and types of species in that particular area of your concern. So, in order to undertake a very meaningful study, you need information on species abundance, and you need to measure all these species richness. When we say richness, we mean diversity. What kind of diversity is there? So, you also have term species diversity. So, species richness is the number of species represented in an area. So, what's like, it's like how many species are there. So, that was species richness, and then the species diversity is like how many varieties are there related to their abundance, like how many variety, how many numbers of each variety. So, you also, in addition to richness, diversity, you also undertake individual species, particularly which are considered to, you take stock of those also, species which are important to understand the conditions required to maintain the population. So, there might be some species which are very key to that place to maintain the habitat. So, this might be needed for species of conservation concern or species that are used to indicate environmental change. So, environmental change, and then you also have these species, you also see pollution indicator species, and these are pollution indicator species. For example, lichens, which are considered to be as a pollution indicator species. They can be used as air pollution indicator, and the kind of environment they sustain it indicates that there's certain level of pollution. So, you would, in this image, you would see that various lichens and black spot fungus. So, if they are present, it indicates that there is problem with the air quality. Then there are other when you have other kinds of species which you see, which indicates whether the water is clean or it has some level of pollution, or it's completely polluted with and have blood worms and sludge worms and so on. So you may take for undertaking all these things, you may take listing approach. You will prepare the list of species. You may take snapshot approach. You may also prepare dynamic baseline. So it's you need not just prepare a list or document that, but you might also need to have a dynamic baseline which shows that how it is changing with time, how it is changing with geographies you're considering. So that actually allows you to predict like what will really happen. And you would also see that many species are able to tolerate short-term environmental variations. So when your project is going, so many of them have the recovery capacity, so then they can recover it. But you also need to see what happens in the long term. So whenever the changes are slow, species are usually able to overcome that. But if the changes are very rapid, then they are not able to overcome that. And for most of these work, you would be requiring specialists. So here you can see how from the same project I have taken the snip here. You can see the summary of the protected species here, and then how what is the protection status and what kind of biological conclusions or impacts one is drawing. So for this flatwood salamandar, you will have no effect. American wood stork, you may effect, not likely to have adversely effect. So on, that entire summary is prepared. Likewise, you can see from the technical EIA guidance manual, I have just picked up thermal power plant. You have most of the sectors manuals are there. So from that also you can refer to what kind of baseline data generation is required. And for here you can look at in the right hand side the biological component, what kind of environmental indicators will be required in Indian context as well. So you see species composition of flora and fauna, flora type, density, exploitation, fauna distribution, abundance, rarity, migratory, and so on, and fisheries. So you see in our context as well what kind of collections we do in order to study or create the baseline study. So that was for this session. We covered the definitions and concepts. So we looked at the key factors of ecosystems. We looked at the ecosystem resilience, and we tried to understand various aspects of it. Then we looked at the habitat, and then we looked at the species population. So this was our key reference for this particular session. And there are certain suggested watch and read for you if you want to learn more, explore more from this. So please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have, to share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.